The following podcast is intended only for listeners who are intent on growing the business. Welcome to Innovate Marketing, where we are bringing you interviews with those that are making waves in the world of marketing, branding, and business growth. We are brought to you by mypodcast.media. If you're wondering how podcasting can help you unleash your marketing strategy, visit mypodcast.media. And now I'd like to introduce you to your host for Innovate Marketing, Sherry Peak.
Hello and welcome to Innovate Marketing. Today our special guest is Heather Spilsbury, and Heather is the Chief Operating Officer and Chief Marketing Officer for 50/50 Women on Boards.
Heather Spilsbury is a highly accomplished Chief Operating and Chief Marketing Officer with over 20 years of experience in marketing, operations, digital advertising, and e-commerce. Before joining 50/50 Women on Boards, Heather was the VP of Marketing and Strategy at The Shepherd, a creative agency in Los Angeles. There, she established the agency's marketing division and grew its EBITDA from $3 million to $26 million.
Welcome, Heather, to the show today.
Thank you, Sherry. It's so nice to be here with you. I appreciate you having us on this conversation.
Oh, you are very welcome, and we're excited to talk to you as well, to hear what you have to share about this wonderful initiative that you started. But before we get into talking about that, let's let the listening audience know a little bit more about Heather, who she is. So, Heather, can you share a little bit about your background with us?
Sure, of course. So my background is in marketing. I've worked for a number of large agencies in my past career and helped build organizations and creative agencies up, and had just multiple experience with a number of different brands and really enjoyed doing that work. I enjoy client work. I enjoy being of service. It's just something that comes really naturally to me. In 2020, I was approached by what was then 2020 Women on Boards and is now 50/50 Women on Boards to come lead their marketing as a chief marketing officer. And I thought, well, this is a great segue, especially coming into the pandemic, which I know we all were taking a reflective look on, what we were doing with our professional careers and how we were impacting communities around us. And so for me, it was a really perfect timing when they reached out to say, hey, this is what we're looking for. And it aligned with so much of my past experience, not only from a marketing standpoint, but just client service standpoint, and also, engaging audiences and serving people in a way that felt productive and impactful. So, I took the job, of course, and then we launched right in terms of transforming the organization and making sure that we were digitally sound, and also ensuring that all of our audiences felt really connected to us in a time where all of us felt disconnected. And in addition to that, we rebranded from 2020 Women on Boards because we had met our goal of 20% women on corporate boards to 50/50 Women on Boards. So the goal now is to have 50% women on corporate boards and at least 20% of all the board seats held by women of color. So for me, this has been such, some people think it might come out of the blue, like you've worked for agencies and your whole career is marketing and now you're working in nonprofit. But for me, it just felt like a really natural segue into something that I wanted to explore both for myself introspectively and then professionally as a career, because, you want to have purpose. And there's a lot of power in purpose in terms of how you can reach people, how you can network with people, how you can engage with people, and how you can ensure that you're elevating people so that they also find their greatness, which has been so rewarding from this position and job.
So where does this passion come from for education equity across the boards? And literally, we're going to be talking about in boards today. Where does that passion stem from for you?
Such a great question. I don't think I realized this until I got into the work, but I am a first generation Latina. So my parents came here from El Salvador with nothing, and they wanted us to ensure that we had a great education, et cetera. And so, that always felt really normal to me. It never felt as if I was different necessarily, but it just felt like that was my place for me to give back to my parents, to make sure that I was also succeeding and making them proud, but of course, making sure that I created a different life for myself than maybe they didn't have. There are things that, I think my dad left behind in particular because of the way he grew up. To come here with nothing was a complete shift. You always think, oh, people that come with nothing have nothing, but that's not true. He had a lot in El Salvador, and he decided to, leave and move and hightail it out of there with my mother and build a life for themselves. And so I felt obligated in a way to also build that life, but also bring other people with me. There's a lot of stories about just my growing up and how I grew up and where I went to school and things like that. But I think the bottom line is I always felt a need to ensure that people felt seen and accepted and heard, because there were moments when I didn't. And I think that is something that when you experience it, you don't want anyone else to experience it. So you either can choose two paths. You can kind of hide and huddle, or you can say, you know what, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to bring other people along, and we're going to continue to ensure that everybody has a voice, and that you're really connecting with people in a way that feels authentic. And so it just felt natural. And I think that's always how I even approached my client work. It was very much about building the relationship, understanding who people were outside of the role. It's like when you have to look someone in the face and negotiate something, whether it's it's a retainer or a project, or, if there's a crisis or something's not working, knowing that person and who they are helps to solidify how you work through those pieces and parts of the relationship. And so for me, I just think it was just natural for me to sort of come into this role to say, okay, I'm going to use my expertise as a marketing expert and operations expert, but to then blend it with this other piece of me that touches upon me so personally in terms of how I want to see people rise to the top, is sort of the way I would summarize that response to your question.
And as a result, so now you are working in the area of purpose. I love that quote that you said, there's power in purpose.
Mm-hmm.
And you are doing some powerful work with the 50/50 Women on Board. So let's talk a little bit about that, about the 50/50 Women on Boards for those who don't know. Again, can you just kind of recap that for those who might have missed that before we go a little bit further into our conversation?
Yeah, of course. So 50/50 Women on Boards is a nonprofit organization, and we're committed to advancing women in the pipeline. And what we mean by that is we're committed to advancing women in the pipeline, providing them with the tools to be able to do that. But we also, on the flip side, help educate corporations on why that is so important, why it's important to have diversity, not only women and women of color, but people of color, and, different skill sets, expertise. You just have to look at the plethora of who is the makeup of your leadership and your board. And so we do that in a number of different ways. One, we do that through our research. So annually and quarterly, we distribute research, sharing the numbers in terms of how many women are on corporate boards from a national perspective, and also how many women of color are on corporate boards based on those who self-identify. We do that also and break it down into different pieces like state and sector, et cetera. And transparently reporting on that data, I think, helps highlight those companies that are, one, doing it right, but the companies that might need some additional support. The other way we do that is we offer board readiness workshops. So we offer that to individuals who want to sign up for those board readiness workshops to understand what their path to the boardroom is. We have two different levels of courses for that, whether you're in your early to mid-career or your senior level career and you're ready for board service. And then we host events. So we host annual fundraising events. And these events are very prescriptive in terms of women attend by their career level and by their board journey, and are coupled with a corporate director who we call a director coach, and at a table with other women who are in their similar path, to be able to network and ask questions about, okay, how do I make my next steps? But in addition to that, it's also a place for you to network with your own community and people in your region who you may have never met. So one of the biggest takeaways that you get from 50/50 Women on Boards is not only building this incredible network of people and increasing your visibility, but you also have the opportunity to make sure that you understand what your capabilities and expertise are. And that's what I love seeing from the board readiness workshops and our events, is that people walk away going, I do have the skills to do this, or I do have the skills to continue moving forward in my career, or I have the skills and now I know exactly what other skills I need to add to my portfolio to be able to get the board seat that I want. And I also walk out with a little bit more confidence to make my ask and to also start to network strategically in a way that feels really authentic to who you are and what your mission and your vision is for your own professional career. So that's how I'd summarize 50/50 Women on Boards. We're not a membership organization. We're strictly a nonprofit. We do charge for our board readiness workshops, and we also charge for our events. But we also ask corporations to purchase those on behalf of their women in their organization to break down that barrier. So that's a lot of our communication is with corporations to ensure that they're bringing their women employees and clients into that discussion.
I love that your company is helping women get into those spaces, but why do you believe there was ever a need to create an organization such as this?
Yeah, that's a really, really good question. So in 2010, we were founded by our founders, Stephanie Sonneban and Mally Jarrow. And really at the time, there was no, there was a lack of women on corporate boards. They were originally looking at the Fortune 1000 company boards and saw that there was, minimal percentage of women. And it was something that really stood out to them. And no one was really having the conversation at the time. So you can imagine in 2010, they're trying to create this organization and build this groundswell of awareness about women in corporate leadership. And it was kind of somewhat ignored. So they started out with the research and the reporting to really transparently share those numbers. And then once they hit the goal of 20% women on the Fortune 1000 companies, they moved on to the Russell 3000 companies, knowing that that's where most of the public companies in the US, you know, lie. That's where that's a majority of the companies. There are nearly 3,000 companies listed there, and it encompasses S&P 500 and Fortune 1000, et cetera. So for them, it was really a mission to ensure that was brought to awareness, and also it's because of what we've seen from other research. So we know that when there's more diversity in leadership and on boards, including gender diversity and race and ethnicity and diversity of experience and perspective, that all of those things help to add to how the board operates and how the company operates and the culture of the company. If you have only one woman on your board, that's not enough. She's not able to stand up and speak up for herself like she would if she had a cohort of three. So we always say that three or more is really where you need to be in order to ensure that it's not just a one and only. And specifically, that also applies to people of color. You can't just have one Black person or one Hispanic person on a board and assume that you've covered your bases. And we see some of that with boards, kind of checking that box off. But it's really about creating a board leadership that's inclusive and has camaraderie, and there's a feeling of belonging, so that if someone does want to share their opinion, they feel comfortable doing that in a way that's productive to the organization.
So, what are some of the challenges that you see today in gender balance or even diversity
Yeah,
on the boards?
yeah, no, it's a great question. I think, things always happen in cycles. So what we always see is, you can start out with the majority of boards being white men. And then when you start to add women, a majority of those women are white, which is okay. That's how sort of that thread starts to move forward. But what we see now is that we have to have both our white men and white women allies helping support people of color so that they can rise to the top, because it then goes in a succession of, okay, now we can get a man of color, because it will start back with men, so it does this sort of path that we want to break that cycle and say it doesn't have to be in that order. You really just need to bring people forward that have the expertise that you're looking for, but also have diversity in other aspects. It doesn't always have to be gender, and it doesn't always have to be race and ethnicity, but if you can find a blend of those things within your board, that's a great way to get a different perspective, because my perspective is completely different from yours, right, Sherry?
Right.
We might agree and have common ground in certain areas, but there might be things that we've experienced in our own professional and personal lives, that may bring another perspective to the table that someone may have not thought of, which is important for companies to help service their own communities that are very diverse and their customers that are diverse, and helps them think about things in a different way.
So when we think about board culture, is there a standard culture for boards, nonprofit, for profit, or is it generally made up of those who actually are the members of that board?
That that's an interesting question. I think what's happening at the board level definitely trickles down to company culture, if that's what you're asking. I think there is evidence and research where we've seen that if the board's diverse, the leadership tends to be diverse, and vice versa. And then from there, that leadership helps implement and orchestrate the culture of the company. And it's not always perfect. So here is what we tell corporations all the time. It's important to get started diversifying your board if you haven't, get started diversifying your leadership if you haven't. And that's not going to change overnight. It's an ongoing process, ensuring that your culture anywhere is feels inclusive is something it's a constant, you constantly work at it. I mean, even with a small team at 50-50, it's something that we work on all the time. You have moments where everyone feels really bonded together and working on the same path, and there's other moments where you have to pull everyone back and say, okay, what can we fix or help change, or where do we need support here or there, vice versa. And that's all about just understanding and making sure that you're connected with your employees, because it's not always going to be like, okay, that's done, we've checked that off, and now we can move forward. And the same thing with the board. That's why succession planning is so important within a board. That's why having a matrix of experience and expertise is so important, like we heard about on today's podcast with 50-50. But I think there are things that you just have to keep checking back in with and making sure that it's moving in the right direction. And if it's not, you change it, and you build, and you look to your board too to help change it, because they're there to support the organization. So utilize their networks to bring in people that you may not have otherwise thought about or have met or have been visible in your network.
Okay, so when we talk about the skill sets that companies are looking for individuals who might serve on their boards, what skills does someone who has served on a nonprofit bring to a for-profit or a public board? Because that's kind of the space that you're looking at for the 50 women that we're going to talk about a little bit more here in a second.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's a great question in terms of transferable skills. There's a lot of transferable skills. I think the most important thing is having the board experience, especially when you're serving like on a global nonprofit, just understanding how the board operates, your role as a board member and what you're supposed to bring to the table. Nonprofit boards often have a give or a get. I've been getting this question a lot, which means that you're obligated to either give a certain amount of money to help support the board and their mission, or you bring that in through sponsorship and fundraising. And that is typical. That is what happens on a nonprofit board because of the mission and functionality of the nonprofit you're serving on. But in addition to that, it's understanding the board roles, making sure that if the board is large enough, especially a nonprofit, and there's committees that you can serve on, that's a great way to get additional experience that are transferable skills to a private or public company board. Understanding and really honing in on your own expertise and making sure that you understand why you're at the table, like what you're supposed to bring to that conversation, I think is vital. And then learning to work with people, having that, again, I'll go back to the word camaraderie, like having that sense of relationship and building that with your board members is crucial, because what happens is not so much it is about the work you do on the board, but in addition to that, I think what's equally important is how you work with people, and having people witness that in you and seeing that, I think is critical. So if they've seen you in action, then they can remember you, and then they can also recommend you. And I think that's the critical piece for serving on nonprofits, because there is a lot of overlap. And we've heard that before, but there is a lot of overlap where someone will say, oh, actually, I work with so and so on this nonprofit. They might be great because here's their skill sets and expertise. And in addition, they can provide ways that you've worked to help elevate that organization as by serving on the board.
So we know this work was created because there was a need. And I have looked at your website and you've got a wonderful resource of reports.
Mhm.
So if people are thinking, hey, that's not us, well, we have some data or you have some data to kind of back that up a little bit. Can you tell a little bit about what individuals can find there if they have a question of how are we ranking or faring in the area of gender diversity or even other things as it relates to their own individual boards?
Yes, of course. So we report annually and also quarterly. So you can find all of our reports on our reports page, like you just mentioned. But we also have a directory. And so we rank companies. We rank them as either having a gender balance board or a board with 3 or more women, or 2 women, 1 woman, or 0 women. So in that directory, you're able to search not only by company, but you can search by state and sector. It's also a really good resource for women because if you're looking for a company within your region that may not already be diverse, it's a great way to find out which companies really need to add women. And then do further research in terms of what their board makeup already looks like, which is public information for public companies. And then saying, okay, it looks like they could potentially, require someone that has, technology skills or a CHRO background, et cetera. So that's a great resource for women to use to be able to look at companies and how diversified their boards are. But in addition to that, corporations also look at it and say, how are we ranking? What's our rating with 50-50 women on boards? And they take great pride in that, especially if they're a gender balanced board or a board with 3 or more women. Um, and so using that information, I think, is also critical for all of us to be able to be educated on, how many companies are there. Really, there's only 11% gender balanced companies to date. And in addition to that, there's 460 companies that still only have 1 woman on their board and 57 companies that have 0 women on their board. So our goal for this year, which is a hefty goal, is to try and eliminate those companies with 0 and 1 woman on their board and get them to at least 2 women on their board, because then we'll start to see critical mass in terms of this shifting. I think, we have to get out of this mindset of it's really hard to diversify our board. We can't find the right candidates. We're not sure that this exists where we need this board member, located, et cetera, et cetera. I just think that the amount of talent that's out there is overflowing and overwhelming, even just by the comments that we get or women we get coming to our page or to us specifically for help. The talent's there. It's everywhere. You just have to look for it and you have to be intentional about it, which is why we launched 50 Women to Watch for Boards.
Absolutely. And you've been working toward this with the pipeline, creating a pipeline of executive women who are ready for board leadership to kind of dispel that notion that we can't find women. So I want to go and talk a little bit about the 50 Women to Watch for Boards and how that plays into the work that you're doing to help provide a space and a place for these women executives to go out into the world and make their mark in leadership on boards.
Sure. Yeah, 50 Women to Watch for Boards. We launched it earlier this month on International Women's Day, and we're so proud of this initiative. We don't place women, so I just want to make sure that everyone's clear on that because it's difficult to place women. You can provide the resources like we've done in the past, but what we really wanted to do was provide a tangible list of board-ready female talent. Women who are already in leadership, whether that's a C-suite position or an SVP position, or a founder who has been running their own organization for 5+ years. We're looking for women that have expertise and the skill sets that boards require. But in addition to that, this list is something that companies can then tap into. So rather than them saying, I can't find the talent, they can say, let's go look to this list and see if there's a viable candidate that would fit what we're looking for, and really make that accessible to them. And in addition to that, what I think is really great about a list like this is not only are we going to highlight the 50 finalists, but we'll highlight semifinalists, but then we have this database of women who have submitted. And to be perfectly honest, it's so hard to pick 50, right? But we have to, because it's part of the initiative. But we can have other candidates that if companies really want to look at them, they can. And I think the important piece is remembering to make yourself visible for board service, to put yourself out there and intentionally ask for what you're looking for are key to getting on a board. And this list will help provide our candidates with that opportunity. If you're not right for a board position, what we've seen just by our own experience and what women tell us, that they'll recommend someone else. So, for example, if someone reached out to me for a board position and I thought, that's not quite right for me at this time, but I know a great candidate, her name's Sherry Peak, let me introduce you. And that is the way as we can we continue to lift as we rise. And I think that's so vital, and that women do that for each other. And I think that's what's also important about a list like this, is that someone will recommend someone else if they're not quite right for the position.
That's good to know right there. So, for someone who's interested in maybe becoming a candidate, can you speak a little bit about maybe who's involved in this process, maybe about what that process looks like and what one can expect to happen throughout this process?
Women should nominate themselves. We've had a few questions about, can I nominate someone on their behalf? And no, we really want women to nominate themselves because, one, you can only speak about your experience and who you are, the way you can. No one else can do that on your behalf. There's also a couple of questions in there, including questions that you need to answer that really need to come from first person perspective. And we also ask that you submit a short video, 30 to 60 seconds long. It doesn't have to be professionally taped. It can be something that you tape on your phone, but just to see your personality and you in action, I think is important for the selection committee who's making the final selections on the 50. So, the application process takes about 45 minutes. And it's something that I think a lot of people are putting some time and effort to. Right now, we have about 238 nominations saved and 34 completed. So we're hoping that everybody completes their nomination by the deadline of April 30th, 2023. And just in terms of the process, as soon as the deadline closes, our internal team will take a pass at all of the people that submitted their nominations, and then just ensure that we separate those nominations out for the selection committee. And if you haven't seen already, we have a fantastic selection committee made up of board directors and nom-gov chairs who serve on companies like The Honest Company, Victoria's Secret and Bright House Financial, Wynn Resorts. We have stock exchange leaders from the Toronto Stock Exchange, TMX Group, and also Maria Ariza from Viva, the Mexico Stock Exchange. So, there's a lot of great expertise that we've blended into the selection committee to ensure that we're getting candidates that are diverse for the list as well, in terms of diverse background and expertise, and also diversity of race and ethnicity, to really elevate these women forward. And then if you're selected as a finalist, you'll receive public visibility, not only through 50/50 Women on Boards, but through our partners. We have a lot of great and exciting things planned for these finalists that we can't quite share publicly, but we'll offer training and introductions to corporate directors and different networks, and also offer speaking engagements, et cetera, because again, your visibility is so key to being on a board, and visibility that works for the type of board that you want to serve on.
Now, that sounds like a very interesting campaign and initiative. And I'm going to be following it because I'm just interested to see women move in such a powerful way. And I know that it will have a great impact on how we do business, going forward as well. So as we kind of take a few minutes to wrap up our conversation today, you've got a lot going on with the 50/50 Women on Board. What other type of activities or events do you look to have this year that maybe women might be interested in participating in?
Yeah, we have a couple of things going on. So our board readiness workshops take place all year long. We have two core classes. One is board fundamentals for early to mid-career women who are looking to understand their path to the boardroom and what it means to serve on a board and how boards work and the types of committees. So really someone who's just being introduced to the opportunity. We want more women in the pipeline understanding that opportunity is there for them, because when I was in my early 20s and 30s, I had no idea that serving on a board was even a possibility. So making that awareness available, and also just educating women on how that process works, I think is so vital for the younger generations. And then for senior level career women, we host Get On Board, which is really about creating your high impact soundbite, which is succinctly describing who you are and your expertise in a conversation so that people remember you. So it's almost your pitch. It's the way that you present yourself and present your ask when you're networking with other individuals, whether you're networking online or at in-person events. And in that same course, we help you with your board profile. And your board resume basically is what that is. So your board profile is a way to separate your skills for board service as opposed to just a typical resume where you list your job descriptions and then what you accomplished within your professional career. This is more about putting those value add experiences up front and then explaining that, in a way that gets you noticed for board service. And then we also host a digital presence workshop in the summer, which is great for all career levels because everybody wants to understand, how do I use digital and social media to help promote myself in a way that's conducive with who I am and my mission and my vision, so that it's authentic, but also that, again, it increases your visibility for board service and how you network with other individuals on those platforms. And then finally, we host our annual events. Our first event is kicking off in Seattle on May 17th, and that follows with Los Angeles on May 18th. So those are in-person events, again, very prescriptive. Usually there's a short panel at the beginning that speaks to how they got on their first board or their second or third board. And then we break away for somewhat breakout sessions at tables where you're paired with people that are of your same career level and expertise and your board path, with a corporate director who helps lead that conversation, which women find very rewarding and gratifying because they walk away with a sense of understanding what to do next. And in addition to that, then you get to network with the entire room. So you get to meet corporate directors who you may have never met within your region, and then network with other women, who are also in your region, but maybe outside of your industry, but you may have commonalities in terms of finding connections and building, that network for yourself in person, which is so much more rewarding sometimes than just doing it online, like actually having the face-to-face conversation. So those are the things we have coming up for the year. There's other things we offer, like you mentioned before, our research, which comes out on a quarterly basis, and then also an annual report. And we also offer something called the Networking Hub, which is a place for women to connect with each other and ask questions of corporate directors, especially if you've taken a workshop. So it's an additional place to source resources and things of that nature, so that you're in a safe space when asking those questions and you're not doing it on a public platform.
Sounds like a one-stop shop to me, Heather. So as we round out our time today, what would be your final thoughts you would leave with our listening audience today?
I would just remind people of how important it is to build your own confidence in yourself, and to remind yourself that, I think it's tough when we're on platforms like LinkedIn to see all these great things that people are doing, to get bogged down into, am I doing enough? And everybody's path is so different. And everybody has great stories to tell. So just to remind yourself that you have the skills and expertise that it takes to serve on the type of board you want to. Now it's just a matter of, making the right connections and building your visibility for board service, if that's the path you choose, or even in your own career. But just to remind yourself of all the things that you've achieved so far. I think that's so important, to take a step back and to really appreciate, what you've done in your own career, and remind yourself that that's a great place to be. There's a lot of time to build your portfolio and build your professional network, et cetera, et cetera. But the connections you make with people are so important. It's vital to anything, because when all is said and done, that's really what you have left, is how have you impacted people who you've been in a room with, and how have they impacted you? And, what difference have you made, wherever you're working, to be able to make those connections, because that's really what gets remembered. Your resume is one thing, but how you connect with individuals, I think, is so important. So I would just leave people with that. Have confidence in your own experience and expertise, and also remember that building those relationships is vital to your path moving forward.
I love those final thoughts coming from you. So, for individuals who might be interested in connecting with you further or learning more about the work that you're doing with the 50 Women to Watch for boards, or the 50/50 Women with Boards, how can they reach you?
Yeah, so I mean, we're really accessible. So you can either go to the website, which is www.5050wb.com, or you can email me directly. My email is really easy to remember. It's just heather@5050wob.com.
Okay, Heather, well, thank you so much for joining us today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. I think this is the most in-depth conversation, specifically as it gears toward women and their professional development and seeking perhaps roles on boards that I've ever had. So I want to thank you for this conversation today. And we really appreciate you coming out and spending time with us.
Thanks so much for having us, Sherry. We appreciate it.
My takeaways from today's conversation with Heather Spilsbury are how important it is to build confidence in yourself, to take time to appreciate what you've done in your own career, that we have to get out of the mindset that it's hard to diversify. And when all is said and done, what we have left is the impact that we have had on others and the connections we've made, and knowing that I am doing enough. Now, friends, that's all that we have for you today. I hope you've enjoyed our conversation with Heather. We encourage you to go look her up and follow her beyond our time here together. And until next time, friends, be great and stay safe.
That brings us to the close of this edition of Innovate Marketing. We're glad you tuned in. Innovate Marketing is brought to you by mypodcast.media. Mypodcast.media produces podcasts for brands, influencers, and nonprofits. Find us online at mypodcast.media. Your producer for Innovate Marketing is Beth Freed. Executive producer, Sean Neal. And your host is Sherry Peak. We'll see you next time. Be sure to tune in.